Let me pray for us. Father, we are grateful for another day that you give us, and especially for an hour to just spend thinking deeply about this book that you've given us thousands of years ago. This ancient book that has such important information for us even today. Help us to understand it for them, and then help us in our own time to move forward and understand it for us, this love letter that you've given us. We're looking to your Spirit to help resolve questions and doubts and other struggles that we're having. So please work in our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so if this is your first time here, you get the benefit of a quick review. So we're going to rewind to last week. Okay, we're going all the way back to the rewind. And now we're going to see, this is how I started it all off. I was talking about that great movie, the greatest movie of all time, right? Yeah, yes, good, Star Wars. Okay, and I said what we're really going to talk about is not Star Wars and not the fact that I peed my pants when my parents put the Darth Vader thing up. Remember all that from last week? If you don't, you got to know the stories. But really, we're talking about creation wars. So my whole theme that I'm trying to get across for Genesis chapter 1 is that the author of this book, of especially Genesis 1, okay, remember it's redacted, it's edited over centuries, but especially the author of Genesis 1, as it's placed at the beginning of Genesis 1 through 50, as it's placed in the beginning of the Pentateuch, as it's placed in the beginning of what we call the Old Testament canon, as it's placed as the Bible, right? As it's in that spot, that particular place, it's trying to get across the author's desire to have a polemic, a war against other literary geniuses of that time who are writing stories about creation that he doesn't find sustainable. He doesn't find spiritually helpful. He doesn't find truthful even. So he's trying to give you a truth for his generation, for his people who are struggling with something specific. That is, what gods should we follow? This is the problem that Israel is going to have from the very beginning all the way through to the exile, right? Should we follow Egypt's gods? We've gotten kind of used to them being in Egyptian captivity. Should we follow Babylonians' gods? Should we follow Assyrians' gods? Should we follow Greek gods? Should we follow Roman gods? Right? All the way to the book of Revelation, which is all about not following Roman gods. Right? Don't follow the Antichrist. Actually, Antichrist is not even in the book of Revelation. I don't know where we get that, but the beasts, the two different beasts, the dragon, all of that stuff, right? So it's Genesis and Revelation are the beginning and the end of this whole big story of what God should we follow, okay? Since I'm going quickly, so I argue that it is told in Babylon in trauma. And the trauma is an exile that Israel has to undergo. They're pulled out of the land, out of God's presence, out of the temple. Really important. They're out of the temple. They're not under the pleasure of God in their mind. They're under foreign gods. And so they're going to write this text that is going to tell the story about this battle between the gods. There are lots of other gods, right? If you're in Egypt, you've got the god Ra. You've at least seen movies, you know about Ra, right? You've probably heard of the god Tiamat. If you've, again, seen movies like The Eternals in Marvel, you've probably heard of the gods like Baal, right? Or Rephet, or Rahav, or Tahom, or there's different gods in the Old Testament. And this author is doing battle with these Babylonian or Egyptian or Assyrian gods. Okay, that's the main plan. So I said that this is in 5 parts. You remember Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They're all telling the story from creation through to God's redemption of the people. And the redemption takes place in the book of Exodus, but even that is all intended to get somewhere. So from creation all the way through to Exodus, as in the removal from the land, all the way to the mountain, right? And getting the promises of God, getting the commands. That's what it's all been about. The whole plan from here to here to here is so that they would get to worship on the mountain. That's been the plan, to get back to this temple. We'll go ahead and build it with a cross, even though that that's anachronistic. There's no cross, but that might be how you think of temples or something like that, right? Here, we've got the temple all the way back here, which we're going to explain majorly next week. It takes place in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. There's a temple. Okay, you've probably never seen it, but it's absolutely there. So we're going to take you on that journey. But this is the journey of creator. Wow, that's terrible. And redeemer. Those are the two reasons that we worship this God. He's the creator of the world and the redeemer of this world. And I've told you that in some senses, this creation theme is going to continue. It's going to progressively parallel. It's going to keep going. There's going to be a creation, and then an uncreation or decreation. And then it's going to start over again, creation. And every time it starts over again, this is God's way of redeeming. He's redeeming what's good. He's taking a small group, he's pulling them out, and he's going to start over. Okay, you're going to see this with Adam. Here you go, small group. Okay, that messed everything up. Here's Noah. Oh, that really messed everything up. This is a disaster. Okay, let's bring in Abraham, the small group. He's going to start. Okay, nope, that didn't really work. Again, Isaac, Jacob, etc. And we get to Moses. Yay, Moses is going to deliver to bring them into the land. Everything's going to be great. And he doesn't get to go into the land either, Joshua. And it just keeps going, right? It's this constant thing of it not quite working, and then him starting over with a smaller group of people, or with the same size group, but a new plan. Okay, so that's the plan, creator and redeemer. I talked about three parts of this, like what I call the Tanakh. Okay, the Torah, the Nevo'im, or the prophets, and the Ketuvim, which is the writings. This is the three sections of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Okay, Torah, 5 books. That's where we're talking about. This is ours. So these are the 5 books. And then we're talking about this particular book. And then we're talking about this little tiny piece of this particular book, right? Just the very beginnings of it. But then the prophets are all connected to this. So this is Joshua, Judges, Kings, and Samuel all here. And then the later prophets, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all those. And then the Ketuvim are all the writings, Daniel, Chronicles, Psalms, Proverbs, all the wisdom literature. Okay, all the extras are in there. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to focus on, this little tiny piece as an introduction to all of that. It's all introducing. Some of these things may have actually come before this little piece in its final form. So the stories, they would have known these stories, or they would have seen certain manuscripts, and they're coming back and they're writing an intro for it. Okay, now the intro existed already. So someone was asking me about that earlier, right? There's already something there. Like Genesis 1 probably exists a long time before the exile, but it's been shaped and remolded and rewritten so that it fits as an exilic book. Okay, that this book is dealing with a particular trauma. Okay, so I said specifically, it is not about creation ex nihilo. Okay, I talk all the time. What's creation ex nihilo? Out of nothing. Good, you guys know your Latin. Well done. Okay, I said that's not what's going on. I'm not arguing whether it's actually out of nothing or not. Creation, I think, probably is out of nothing. I think John makes that, Colossians a little bit, Hebrews not so much, but whatever. I think that probably is the case, and I can't think philosophically how it would work otherwise. I'm just saying Genesis isn't about that. Okay, that's simple. It's not saying I disagree with it. It's just saying that's not the point. So ex nihilo is not the goal. The goal, again, is to combat the gods of their time. So they're writing a polemic against the other gods, against gods like Ra, Baal, all those fertility gods. Okay, so they're gonna conquer those gods, or Tiamat. Okay, and so you see that really early on, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Right, and we did that last week. Bereshit bara Elohim. And I was reminded that I didn't really talk about that a lot, but in the beginning is waiting for something. It's in the beginning of something, right? It's actually not grammatically, it's not good grammar. Okay, in the beginning, okay, but whatever, in the beginning, God created. We've got tons of questions. This first verse, I could ask 20 questions about this first verse. Most of you just run right over it. It's like, this verse pretty well, but who is this God that we're talking about? Elohim. Who is Elohim? And why later on is he going to be called something very different? Even as early as this next chapter, he's not going to be called Elohim anymore. What's happening with that? He's going to be called Yahweh. Okay, you don't see these things. All you see is God and Lord. Okay, but just so you know, whenever you see this in the Bible with all capital letters, but a little bit smaller letters here, okay, that just means Yahweh. right? Whenever you see this, all lower like that, that means Adonai, means master. So this is a name of God, Yahweh. This is a title of God. And Elohim is actually plural. Im is plural, okay, for just generic gods. So you're going to ask all kinds of, like, why do we even translate it as God then? Why shouldn't it be gods? And the answer is yes, it should be gods. In the beginning, gods created the heavens and the earth. The only reason that we don't translate it as gods is because of the larger context of what's happening here. Okay, there's something else going on that's very obvious that he's talking about a single God. Okay, so whenever you see Elohim, you should ask, is this talking about gods or God? Of course, you're never going to see Elohim, right? All you're going to see is God. They've already done the work for you in the translation. So you probably don't ever have to worry about it. You'll just see this, God. Okay, so in the beginning, God created bara. Bara means to create. Some people, you may have heard this in the past, that the word bara is only used of God's creative acts, that man can't bara, but that's a super easy thing to show you just by walking through the Bible and looking at each use of bara, that God is not the only one who baras. Okay, other people bara all the time. It's like saying agape is the God love. It's the God, only God can do it. All I have to do is walk you through the Bible itself to show you that other people agape, right? It's a normal thing, right? So you can say that about your own love too. So, all right. So in the beginning, God created or made. There is another word, asa. There's actually other words too, asa, which means to mold. Okay, could have used that. They all mean to make or to create. They're all they're just using them a little bit differently. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We talked about that last time, right? Or the land and the sky. Maybe. It's probably not talking about this third heaven, this place where God dwells. And man, it's probably talking about this and this. And that's going to become really important when you get to verse 2, right? Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without what? Form and void, which I gave you a cool word. What is it? Good job. Tohu va bohu, or vohu at the end. Okay, this is just the word and. So tohu and bohu, okay, which just means formless and void, wild and waste. It means chaos. So this is the beginning of the world, and it's chaos. And I explained, this is a surfer getting hit with a sand. Remember all this? The water's all over top. It's black. You don't know which way's up. You don't know which way's down. And God is going to do some work. He's going to start ordering things. He's going to order the universe. I told you it's not about him creating the house as much as it is as him creating the home. That's a good way to remember it. It's not he's creating the structure of things. He's got the things, okay? Because there was tohu vabohu, right? There was chaos, form and void, and he was floating or hovering over the face of the deep. So there's water. All that stuff exists, and he's going to come in and he's going to start moving it. He's going to start forming it. Because if he wants to play a game, remember I told you if he's going to play Monopoly, I stole Pete N's thing. If he's going to play Monopoly, you got to clear the table off, right? You got to wipe the syrup from the kids this morning, right? You got to make it because you don't want the money to stick to the table anymore. Okay, so you got to do the work in your messy house. When you move into a house, you got to get the boxes put in the right places, and then you can rest, which is the goal. Because by chapter 2, God is going to take Adam, his priest king, and he's going to put or place him into a garden in order to nuach, to rest. Okay, and later on, we're going to find out that someone else is going to come along to bring in true rest, and his name is going to be called nuach, rest. You know him from the Ark story, nuach, Noah. That's how you would say it. Okay, so all that's coming, setting the scenes for all of this happening. All right, so there's tohu vabohu, there's great chaos, and there's darkness, and God is hovering, or the Holy Spirit, right, or the mighty wind, or the mighty breath. We don't know how exactly to translate all of that, but something is hovering over the face of the deep, or the abyss, or the sea, the waters. It's the word tehom. Okay, tehom, which probably ends up going to the word Tiamat, or comes from the word Tiamat. Okay, a long time ago. Tiamat is one of those dragon gods, those chaos monsters. You see those all throughout the Old Testament too. You're like, I've never seen a chaos monster in the entire Old Testament. I know, because you don't read Hebrew. Okay, and you're not reading in context of that, but they're all over the place. They've got names: Rahav, Leviathan, Behemoth. right? You're like, wait a minute, those are in the book of Job and those are dinosaurs. They're not. Okay, I'm sorry, I love you guys, but it's just like 99% consensus. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about these ancient gods. Okay, these seven-headed dragons. You've seen them in if you saw Percy Jackson, or you read any of the Percy Jackson books by Riordan, whatever his name was, right? Like you see the seven-headed monster. You've probably seen it in whatever Greek myths you've seen. There's seven-headed monsters. These are common in the ancient Near East, and God is doing battle with them. Okay, that's what's happening. So he's going to build a rakia. Is that verse? Let's see. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness, Hoshek, was over the face, pane, of the waters. Okay, and then God says, let there be, right, or light. Okay, this is the beginning of the movement, the shifting. So what he's going to do, I need to erase all of this, because this is where you start getting into the fights, right? What is happening on this first day? Wait, did I do all the review stuff good enough? Let's see. Is there anything else I need to really do here? Tiamat, Enuma, Elish. Yep, that's where we're at. Okay, so this is kind of new stuff, but I started to talk about this. So what we start fighting about is how old the earth is, right? And we think that Genesis 1 is going to answer this question for us, or at least Genesis 5, Genesis 4 and 5, Cain and Abel story with that long list of genealogies there, or we think Chronicles with a long list of genealogies is going to solve this problem. We count backwards with Bishop Usher and John Lightfoot. None of you were around for this because it was hundreds of years ago, but they counted through and they gave us an exact time when Adam was born. Okay, 4004 BC. Okay, BC was probably obvious to you, but 4004. So the earth is what, 4004 plus 2023, 27, that's 6,027 years old, right? Is that what I did? So that's what he would say. It's 6,027 years old. Okay, but most of you have taken some sort of biology, anthropology, any class, or you've just looked at a TikTok once in your life, right? And you know that there's no way it's 6,027. And some of you are saying, oh, yes, it is. It's definitely 6,027 years. So there are ways for us to understand the Bible that will let us hold to this 6,027 years, right? It's basically God creating a world that's already aged. Okay, that he's just started it, already aged, trees were already there, everything was already exactly the way it is. And so it looks like it's 100,000 years of mankind, or 100,000 to 250,000 years for mankind, depending on whether you're, it doesn't matter, the different scholars that are talking about these things. Francis Collins says 100,000, and I think, who's our main atheist evolutionary? Richard Dawkins, right, says that it's about 250,000. Doesn't make any difference. Okay, all of them will say we're talking about at least millions of years of the galaxy existing, the creation of the universe. Okay, so 6,027 doesn't quite do it. Doesn't even do it for mankind, right? Minimum 100,000 years is what science tells us. So then we get into this great thing. Is science right, or is the Bible right? Right? These are the fights that we have. And the answer is, yep, of course. The answer is yes. Well, they contradict each other. Not necessarily. They only contradict each other if you insist that the Bible is interpreted the way you think it has to be interpreted, or science is interpreted the way you think it's interpreted. Okay, they actually, nature and God actually agree on things. God created nature, I think. They actually agree. It's our interpretations that are bad, of one or the other. Now, since I don't know that much about this, I'm going to question our interpretation of this. That doesn't mean that's fair, right? You scientists in the room, maybe I should be asking you to question your interpretations on things. That's perfectly legit. And then in this particular church, like half of you are scientists in some way, right? Doctors, that means you know science pretty darn well, okay? And I should be asking you to question some things. And you know, if you've grown up in the science world, you know that science changes pretty regularly, right? Or the consensus view changed, like, okay, we're shifting to this now. Okay, we're going a little different. You've seen that happen. But with the Bible, For some reason, we're very firm in the way it's understood, but we shouldn't be. There are different ways to understand this. So the most common way throughout history of understanding what's going on are 24-hour days, right? And you would have guessed that. It says God created the world in 6 days. On the 7th day, he rested. There's no reason for days to be understood in any other way. Most people throughout time have thought this is what it was talking about. I'm actually going to argue this is exactly what it's talking about when it's writing these things. Okay, but probably not the way you think that I'm going to say that. Okay, so some people would say, like, there's something that's called the day-age theory. Is that right? Day-age theory? I wrote everything down so I don't have to remember stuff. Gap theory, restoration theory, framework, hypothesis. Day-age or concordance theory. Yes, that's the one. And that's the one that says, like, day can mean lots of things. The word yom can mean lots of things. Like, that's the day, that'll be the day that I die, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be a 24-hour, it just means sometime in the future. That's not a really good example because you die on an actual day. The day of the dinosaur, right? Or you remember the days when, right? That, like, it can have a larger feel, okay? I don't think the author was trying to think that way. I think that's probably illegitimate. It's fine, but if you do that, then you can have things like thousands of years go by in a day. And there's a verse that talks about that, right? God's has 1,000 years as a day, so it could be thousands of years. Okay, that's a possibility. There is what's called the gap theory. So this is day-age. Gap theory means that between verse 1 and verse 2, there are thousands of years of Genesis chapter 1. So thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years have gone by in between that and that. So it's a gap between those 2 days. Okay, I don't think that's what's going on, but you can hold on to whatever you want. There's something called the restorationist view, which is just a piece of the gap theory. I'm doing this really quick. In seminary, I'll spend like 2 days talking about this, 2 literal days talking about this, 24 hours, 48. Okay. Restoration is during this gap period. This is when God would fight the monsters. He'd have these battles with Tiamat, etc. Okay. I don't think that's what's going on. Actually, I don't think the author's thinking that's what's going on. And there's a big difference between what's actually going on and what the author thinks is going on, which we'll talk about in a second too. Okay, so the restorationist, there's something called analogical days. Analogical, that is, it's a way of speaking about a work week. You guys know what a work week is. It's 6 days and then a rest, right? They would have thought about it. It's 5 days and 2 rests for us, okay, or maybe 7 days and no rests for you. I don't know, right? But it's these days, and so the author is just kind of putting this into it. It's morning, it's evening, morning. Well, I get up, I go to work. It's evening, and it's good. I did my day's work, and it's not trying to say it's a specific amount of time. It's just like 24 hours. You know, a work day is only 8 or 9 hours, maybe 10 hours, whatever. It's you're working and then you're done. So it could last any amount of time. Okay, I think that's very fair. I think that's legit. It doesn't answer all of our questions to how much time it is. By the way, I'm not going to answer all your questions. I'm just going to confuse you more. That's my goal here. Okay, analogical, and then framework. And the reason I want you to see the framework view is not because it answers any of our questions, but it reminds you that this is a piece of literature and not a piece of science. Okay, and that's what we're always trying to go and figure out how Genesis defeats our evolution, views on evolution. But nobody, Moses, if you believe Moses wrote, or during the exile, nobody believed in evolution, right? So there's no chance that they're trying to argue against evolution. It's not like those primitive people, and we need to help them understand that's really about, that's not what's going on here. Okay, they're fighting against people at their time and the arguments that they're having. So day one, you guys help me out with this. Okay, what's happening on day one? What does God do on day one? Light. Okay, we did this last week, but we did it very quickly, so I want you to see it. Okay, so light. Day two. What do you do on day two? What? I can't hear what anybody's saying. He created heaven, okay? So sky, and let's say, yeah, sky, water. What he does is there's something called a rakia. Okay, I believe I mentioned this last week too, but I didn't go into great detail with it. Remember Captain America's molded thing that he puts up in the heavens? So the whole point now is that he's created light. No one can see. Remember what it looks like. It's all black. Okay, and then here's Adam in here, and he can't breathe. So what he's got to do is, first of all, he's got to shoot some light through. Okay, so there's got to be some ways for him to be able to see. And now what he's going to do is he's going to put a rakia. Okay, and remember, same pedagogical faux pas last time. I'm going to go ahead and make it like this, so you will get the point that I'm going to make here later on. And he's going to make a rakia up there. Now I got to put him back in the same place. Okay, that's going to separate the waters above from the waters below. That's what he's trying to do. So now we've got waters up here, and we got waters down here. Okay, now there's nothing in here. He can breathe now. Of course, he can't swim. He's not a fish, so he's going to die. So what is day 3? It's again separation of waters so that land appears. Okay, so now he's going to separate here and make land appear. So now mankind has a place. That's the whole goal of what's happening here, right? That mankind, Adam, mankind, that's all that means. It's a generic name. It's not a personal name. It's a generic name, mankind. Okay, mankind has a place to live. Mankind is an icon, or a tselem, or a demut. Okay, icon in the Greek, you know what icon is. You guys play on computers? You have an icon, you pick your particular icon. Okay, it's the representative for you. Okay, and you might make it into some buff thing if you're fighting against something. If you're doing Wii bowling, it's going to be the guy that looks the most like you, or the girl. You're going to give it a handlebar mustache, whatever you want it to be, right? You can make it look like what you want. Or if you've seen, what is that? What is Spielberg's biggest movie? Is that right? Spielberg's, what's the blue? Avatar, right? That's what we're talking about here. An avatar is an icon. Okay, somebody who it represents. Okay, and that's the same thing. Tselem, demut, image, likeness. You're going to get to this when we get to verse 26 through 28, which hopefully we're going to do in just a few minutes. Okay, because this is super important. Okay, so Adam, mankind now is able to represent him on earth. So now he's separated things so that his icon can live. Now he's going to fill each of these places. Okay, so of course, day 4 is going to be what? Sun, moon, and stars. Although recall, he's not going to call them sun and moon. He's going to call them greater and lesser lights, because he's not going to give any kind of legitimacy to any of these gods out there. They're just greater and lesser lights that Yahweh, God, or Elohim has made. So if you start worshiping sun and moon, I mean, you can worship them if you want to, but you're kind of dumb, because there's something that created them. Someone created them. Why worship them when you can worship the one who created them? Oh, and by the way, also stars. It's almost like a throw on if you're looking in Genesis chapter 1, verse whatever it is, 18 or something like that. Okay, so sun, moon, and stars, day 5. Which ones? Right. Birds and fish. The ones that are here and the ones that are here. He's filling the different places because he's separated the waters. Now I'm like, okay, we'll put these up in these. By the way, the sun, the moon, and the stars are put on the rakia. Okay, so don't think of them as outer space. Think of them as stuck on this globe. This, the globe, the water globe, the snow globes. All right, think of it as just stuck to the glass up there. Okay, this is the way they're talking about the story. That doesn't mean that they're idiots that are writing this. Doesn't mean even that they believe that they're really stuck on this. This is the way that the concept that they would, some of them probably did think that way. Okay, so this is what the world looks like in the ancient Near East. It looks a lot like this. There's a mountain, there's a rakia that's held up by the mountains. Okay, there is land, and there is water, and water, and mankind is going to dwell on it. And there's moons and there's stars, all these different things. And the mountains hold them up. They're pillars of the earth. And underneath, by the way, there's also water, okay, which will one day shoot up. The floodgates will open. And by the way, there's windows in the rakia we're going to find out later on that will one day, very soon, by the way, within 5 chapters, you may know this story, are going to open up the rakia and the floodgates are going to fall down. And then we're going to have Tohuvabohu is back, okay, within 6 chapters. Okay, but I've jumped the gun, so you're not supposed to know that yet. Right now, everything is Tov, good. God is creating something good. I didn't finish, but these are all good, good, good. Right, and then we get to day 3, of course, and he's going to create what? Sorry, day 6. Man and animals. I don't know what animals look like there. Some kind of animal. It's a big blobby animal. Okay, this is what he's created. So each of these things are going to fill these. So we call this the framework because we want you to see that day 1 is filling, day 4 is filling day 1, day 5 is filling day 2, day 6 is filling day 3. This doesn't answer the question of how long the days are, anything like that. What it does is it says you're asking the wrong questions of the author. The author's not trying to do that. He's not trying to answer your modern questions. He's trying to set up this beautiful artistic picture. And you can see it even in Genesis 1. Right? Genesis 1 is kind of poetic. I hope you've noticed that before. Right? You know how you can tell if something's poetic? There's more white space on the page in the Bible. Right? So it's written in kind of lines. And you can see some of that parallel structure. It's not totally poetic. There's still vayiktal verbs. There's still like, and this happened and this happened. That's not very poetic. But the fact that it happens with some sort of a cadence, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1, and God said it was good. And day 2, right? It's this, there's this beautiful poetry that's going there. And when you deal with poetry, you're not generally supposed to ask questions that are scientific questions. Okay, it's like looking at the difference between Exodus 14 and Exodus 15. Okay, if you start looking at those 2 chapters, do you know what happens in 14 and 15? This is when they cross the Red Sea and God crushes the enemy, right? Breaks Rahav, the sea monster's back. Okay, he destroys Egypt. If you look at chapter 14, they march through on dry ground, all this stuff happens and this, and then, but if you read 15, which is the song that they sing afterwards about it, and you try and match those things up, you're going to find some real problems. Are the people landing on the shore? Or did they sink down to the depths of the sea? You're like, well, they sunk down to the depths of the sea. Then later they were about, okay, you have to start doing magic tricks to make everything work. Okay, just like we like to do in the New Testament. Did Judas die on, did he like hang himself or was he disemboweled? Oh, well, what happened was he hung himself and then the rope broke and he fell down a cliff and on the way down, he hit some rocks and he was disemboweled. Like, I don't know that you got to do all that work, right? These might just be 2 different traditions that are going on. And I'm going to argue that Genesis 1 is a tradition of creation and Genesis 2 is a different tradition of creation. And both of them were put there for a reason. It's not that the author was like, oh, crud, mess this one up, right? I got Genesis 1, I got Genesis 2, and different things are happening. Like there's a different order in Genesis 2. It's a different order as to what happens. So which one's the right order? You're asking the wrong questions, okay? That's a science question that the author would be like, I don't care. It's like, this is a poem, right? God created. It's not that God created exactly like this in this particular order, and this is the exact way he had to have done it. No, this is a beautiful poem about Yahweh, the creator, and not Tiamat, and not Baal, and not Ra, right? These are all bad kings, bad gods. Does that make sense? Do you have questions? Because the last thing I wanted to say in this, which I've got 20 minutes to do, which is great. Well, I can keep going, trust me. We're going to chapter 2. But I want to talk about mankind as king, which is really important, 26 through 28. But I'll go there next. Anything you need re-clarification on? Things that you're just upset that I'm saying? You're convinced I'm going to be run out of here on a rail, tarred and feathered? No questions? Okay, go ahead.
How do we know that all this is written during the Babylon time to explain all that to the people at that time? How do we know that?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so that is going to be an entire Hellsgeschichte story for me to tell you. That's right. So the answer is I can't give you an easy answer to that. What I would say is what we're doing is we're watching the way scripture moves and we're seeing the connections that it's making for that particular time. And we're asking, where does this situation, what we call the Sitzenleben, the setting in life, where is the most natural setting in life for this? So as I'm going to show you in chapter 2, basically what I'm trying to do is make that argument for these 11 chapters. Okay, that's going to end in Babylon, the creation of Babylon. Okay, that's going to be pretty telling right there. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to show you that there's a temple being created in chapters 1 and 2 that is going to compete with the other nations, the Babylonian gods. So some of the reasons are things like, well, we're fighting against Tiamat. Tiamat is a Babylonian god. Why would they be telling the story at this point? Why are we doing this? What happens in the exile? What's this national trauma that's going on? What answers do they need? What are they struggling with right now in their world? And what they're struggling with is we're going to go back to this land. We're going to go back into the promised land, and we're not supposed to take these gods with us. You know how fast you accommodate a new worldview? Just imagine, right? How long has America been in existence? A couple hundred years? Yeah, I mean, if we want it to be 300 years, we can go that way, but it's not really America earlier than that. So yeah, a couple hundred years, right? None of you have even the slightest ability how to think outside of American Christianity. And that's been 200 years, right? If you read a book by an Egyptian, a Coptic Orthodox person, you will just throw it in the trash. It's so foreign, so ridiculous to what you would think of, because you're so used to it. That's 200 years. Think about after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of going from one empire to another empire to another empire, right? They've been living in this destructive world of, well, let's say Egypt, but then they had their own empire themselves for a little while, but then Babylon and, then Assyria, then Babylon. So allow me maybe to try to make the argument slowly. So what I'm going to keep doing is I'm going to keep showing you how these stories are going to connect with things that are happening at that time. Like, for instance, the book of Ezekiel. Okay, what's happening in Ezekiel, or the book of, even the book of, well, not quite Haggai, but during the time of the exile. So I'm going to show you what's happening with the temple, the destruction of the temple, how everybody is destroyed because of this destruction of the temple. All that's happening in Genesis 1 through 11. So I'm not going to totally answer it, but I'm going to give you more hints along the way. In the end, one second. It's okay if you're going to hold to Mosaic authorship. Okay. In fact, I'm going to show you connections that I think this has for a Mosaic audience as well. Okay. Because I think it does. I don't think it's written completely imaginatively during the exile. I think this story exists long before that. And what they've done is remolded it for later. But I think the story actually fits pretty well for them in slavery in Egypt as well. So I'm going to show you what's happening there too a little bit later. Joe, yeah. Yeah, does it fit in the Egyptian? Right. Right. So to do this justice, 100% what Joe just said, to do this just, we've got to, like, there is going to be an Egyptian author. Actually, we need to start even way before that. We need to start with like an ancient Near Eastern audience. Like there's fragments of what probably is Genesis 1 out there, and Genesis 2, maybe Genesis 6 through 9. These are kind of going to be existing, maybe not even in literary, but in oral form, long before long before, I would say maybe even long before Noah and even exists, or even Moses, right? Moses is writing this long before these things. These are ancient texts. We have some of these ancient texts, okay? But then they're going to be reworked for Egypt. Then they're going to be reworked during the monarchy. Okay, I think David's authors probably had some major pieces of this. Okay, so people will argue something called JEDP if you ever took a Bible class in college or something like that. So there's the Yahwist text, there's the Elohist text, the Deuteronomist, and the priestly. So these are all happening at different ages. So like 9th century, 8th century, 6th century, 5th century. JE were probably combined in the 7th century before Christ. Right, so they're being brought together. So what I'm arguing is that this is a priestly text, and priests are pretty significant. I before E except after. The priestly motif is going to be really heavy in Genesis 1. I can only show you that when I get to Genesis 2, how important this is. So really what I'm going to argue is not that this is simply God versus Yahweh versus all the other gods. I'm saying that he's building a home for his creation. And his home is going to be that, I can't draw a temple, so I'm not going to. It's going to be a temple. So he's creating a temple. This is a temple creation story. He's placing his man in it, in the temple, as a priest and a king. Okay, a kingdom of priests, Exodus is going to talk about constantly. He's going to say, Adam, you're the priest king. You're supposed to represent me well. Actually, that's the final thing I want to talk about, that representation. But go ahead. Jump in.
Very quickly.
Okay. That's right. An argument against. Yep.
Is it possible? What the author is saying, yes, we're in captivity. Yes, we've been beaten badly. But God, the creator, is bringing order out of chaos.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly what's going on. Great application. Thank you for that. I have a long list at the last end of this of little tiny ways that we can apply this, but I figure I'll never get to the application part. That's okay. That's fantastic. Like all the little ways that we bring disorder to the world, God is ordering. He's starting to make this work. So when you tell your children they need to make their bed, you actually have an argument from Genesis, right? That God is a God of order, not of disorder. We're supposed to be bringing order. Yeah, we'll leave it at that because I can go the other direction too. Okay, so let's talk about Genesis 1:26 through 28, if you've got your text there. Okay, so this is Genesis 1:26 through 28. Okay, this is called the cultural or the creation mandate. Okay, so you've probably heard it before. Verse 26 starts off with, let us. Remember that? Let us make man, am I right? Verse 26, let us make man in our image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And he gave them this mandate, right? That they should fill the earth, right? Increase and multiply in the earth, fill it, and subdue it. Okay, so there's all these different words, okay, we need to talk about. Fill, let us, image. Okay, so let us, we probably need to deal with that real quick because I know as our immediate response to this means Trinity. God is talking to the Trinity, okay? Maybe in reality, that's exactly what's happening. In their mindset, when they're writing this, there is no understanding of the Trinity. Okay, so that's not what they're trying to get across. I believe in the Trinity. I think God does and is in that triangular relationship and has been for eternity. Okay, I just don't think that's what the text is doing. Okay, what it's doing is pulling in an ancient motif, which we call the divine counsel motif. Okay, so divine counsel is when the gods all get together, gods, plural. If you have any question as to whether there's lots of gods, read any psalm, basically, and you're going to find constantly that there's lots of different gods. I've already named a bunch of them. Now, whether you believe they exist in reality is a different question. They exist in the literature, at least. Okay, it's a totally different question as to whether it's real or whether they're creating a literary motif. Okay, but in the literary world, which is what mythology is, right? Myth always exists in literature. Okay, myth, it's not, I mean, I don't know if there's really gods sitting on clouds. I don't think so. I find that kind of crazy, but let's just say that that's the picture of it, that they all get around this round table, right? And of course, you know, there's Sean Connery as the king, of course, in my version of this, because he makes a good, you know, King Camelot, King Arthur. And all of them have their swords and they all lay them down, right? So this is the divine council, and it's a round table and they all have discussions. Although in this particular round table, another kind of hit that the round table the council motif is taking here is that Yahweh seems to be in charge of this in a very significant way. So even while he's getting counsel, let us make man in our image, he is the one who's going to be doing it. He is in charge of this, which is very similar to, right? One of the chairs is still King Arthur. Okay, he's, I don't know what the king, okay, he's got a king. Right? He's still King Arthur. He still makes the decision. He's still the king, even though it's a round table. Okay, so that's probably what's going on here, even though, granted, divine round table comes way after this divine council motif. I'm just using it as an analogy, right? But they're sitting around and they're having these conversations. You'll see it in many places throughout the Bible if you actually read slowly, right? There's always these questions. Who will go for us? And Micaiah says, I'll go. Or Isaiah says, here am I, send me, right? This is all taking place in a divine council room. It's a setup where lots of people are going. Sometimes angels will say, I'll go, I'll be the one. Or he'll choose, Gabriel, you go and do this. Okay, Michael, you go do this. Okay, even one time there's a deceitful, like one of the deceitful angels or gods says, I'll go. He's like, yeah, go and deceive this person, lie to them. But God sends someone out to lie, but we'll deal with that some other time. Okay, so let us is not talking about the Trinity, but the key thing is here, let us make God in our image, in our demut and our tselem, our image and our likeness. So this idea travels through all of the biblical narrative and into the early church history and all the way today. People are still fighting about what does it mean to be made in the image of God, right? We're asking questions like identity, sexuality, features. Does God have a strong right arm? Does he see throughout all the earth? What are all the questions that are going on here? So that can continue to be a question. I'm not going to answer that final question as to what it is now, but I think it has to bounce off of what it was then for them. And for them, image is a way to understand somebody being created as a god, okay, like a picture, an icon. Okay, so they're being created, that's a mimeograph. So in that world, when a king comes and conquers, a suzerain king, you remember this from your political science or history, a suzerain, the big king, comes and he conquers and he makes another king his vassal. Now we got the vassal king, so the big king comes and he says, okay, I'm gonna let you remain the king, maybe. Or maybe he'll get rid of that vassal king and he'll put in his own vassal king. So for instance, Caesar Augustus will destroy the entire world, conquer the world, right? And then he'll put in his king, and his king is named Herod. You guys know this situation? Herod is only king, okay, Jewish king. He's only king as long as Caesar Augustus is happy with him, as long as Herod represents him well. Pontius Pilate is only in charge as governor as long as Caesar is happy with him, which is why, you know, Pontius Pilate's like, I'm just gonna, like, I don't, because that's what the Jews say, right? You have to kill this guy because he's saying stuff about Caesar. Like, okay, well, once you said stuff about Caesar, I got to get rid of this Jesus guy. Okay, all of it's about who you represent. So they're going to put that king in there, and they are now Caesar Augustus. King Herod, you're Caesar Augustus to those people at that time. If it's a small enough place and you're not going to have a king of it, you're going to build a statue, probably. You're going to put a statue and put it in the center of the square, and it'll be, you know, Caesar Augustus standing there with his sword in his hand. Because every time you walk into town, you want to remember, this is Caesar Augustus's place. Okay, this is God's place, the suzerain king. So he's going to build Adam, and Adam's job is to represent him in the world, to be made in his image. Adam, you're supposed to look like me in all the world. That doesn't mean he's looking like him. It means he represents his character, what he's supposed to be, who he's supposed to be. Okay, Adam is supposed to, later on, he's going to be called to serve and to guard in the garden of God, or the temple of God. I'll make that argument later, that the garden is actually a temple. Okay, so he's going to serve and guard in this temple. He's going to be a priest in this temple. He's going to be a king here. Who's he king over? The rest of the world. Okay, like, well, there is nobody else in the world. That's because you're reading it in a particular way. Okay, there's plenty of little hints that there are lots of other people in the world. In Genesis chapter 2, lots of other little hints. It's okay if you want to stick to that this is a pristine new couple that God has furbished from the beginning, but there's something else going on that actually tells the story, the entire history of the story, so much more beautiful and doesn't have all the little contradictions that we struggle with. Like, well, if man is created perfect here, then this is a real problem. Like, how does Cain get his wife? That doesn't make any sense. Where does Cain go to, later on to build a city with who? Who's he afraid of when he says, God, like, I've killed people. People are going to try and kill me. Like, people, God be like, there's nobody else, literally 0 other people. Why are you worried about this? Right? No, he's worried because there are people. Okay, because we're thinking of this as an origin story of all of creation instead of an origin story of Israel, which is very different. Israel's being created again out of Babylon or out of Egypt, wherever you're at, right? That's where we're going to end up getting. Okay, so he's created his image to represent. That's the key word. By the way, when you get to the 10 Commandments, that's what it's all going to be about. Even all these weird ones that you don't really understand, like don't take the Lord's name in vain. You're like, okay, so we can't say GD. That's the rule, right? I can't even say it in here because I'd be kicked out, right? Which has nothing to do with it. What it means to bear the Lord's name. It means represent God well in the world. Okay, don't use his name or his person in empty ways, but represent him correctly. Be God to the people. In regards to primarily in the Old Testament, justice. So some of you who are unhappy when certain pastors stand up and talk about justice issues, and of course you'd never say you're unhappy about justice issues because justice, but that's exactly what the whole Old Testament is about. Is trying to remind you that God is a fair God and he's trying to do something. He's trying to make something, and he's using you as his representatives to make the world a place of equity and beauty. Right? That's what he's trying to get to. So every week should have something to do with justice, because this is what God is trying to do, bring the world back to rights. I don't mean trying to do like, oh, I can't do it, but he's working. Like there's this theme, ooh, here we go. There's theme music going underneath the story that's happening even right now. There's a theme music. I'm using that. Listen real well. Did you hear the theme music? Because when we get to the sermon, that's going to be a main piece. So I'm trying to connect things, because that's why they pay me the big bucks, making connections like that. Okay. All right. Like 1 minute. Okay. So represent, fill the earth and subdue it. We'll start back here at that point. But I just want to introduce it. Filling, multiplying. What is happening here? Why are they called to multiply? Right? Because the whole plan of God is that Israel, the temple, would expand over the entire world. By the way, that's what we get in Revelation. Remember? Right? There is no place for a temple. There's no place for a sun or a moon even, by the way. There's no sea anymore. All the things that are there, like he's expanded it. The temple now takes up the entire space of the land. It's no longer in one little place. The whole point was to keep expanding. Okay, but it still fits into the story. Have children. Adam and Eve have children. But it's bigger. It's Israel. Have children. That is Israel. Go out, your city shining on a hill. Right? Show the world, make others Yahweh worshipers, bring them in to what you have as me as a generous God giving you all these things, bring them in. Okay, so that's the filling, multiplying, subdue. And a better word for that is steward. In our world, the better word is steward. I've changed it, and a lot of people change it because when we think of subdue, we're thinking of some kind of subdue, domination, right? Like I can do whatever I want in the world. I'm called to subdue it. I'm the king. That's right. You're the king. But your king has responsibilities to its subjects, to its people. Right? So it's supposed to be about stewarding or caring for, again, serving and guarding, avad and shamar, which is going to be significant in the book of Ruth again in a few weeks. Remember that we've talked about this. It's all going to be connecting because Boaz is called to serve and guard, to do these exact same things. By the way, the priests in Leviticus are called to avad and shamar in the temple. Okay, we're going to get to all that. That's just, I've stopped. I'm no longer on. It's time. All right, there we go. See you guys later. Seriously, yeah, I'm done. It's done. See you guys next week or in a few minutes in worship.